Welcome to 44 and 1, an audio-only version this week. I'm GVizzle, with me is Tempest, and today we're talking about a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, well, obviously I'm in a grouchy mood because my neck's killing me. So chronic pain, hence the audio only, so I can be in pain and not have anybody watch me do it. And then we're just going to talk about a bunch of, what's going to be a lighthearted one, and then we got talking and then it went off the rails.
We went all over the place this time.
So there's this woman, she's talking about how she's got a new friend now and about how they became friends. It was a really weird story. She hasn't done part 2 yet, so I don't know how they actually formed the friendship. But to start with, she in the first part was about how they got in contact. So this woman woman A was trolling woman B. So woman B is the TikTok videos watching. Woman A would leave shitty comments all the time and she'd delete them, block the person. And then this person, woman A, would end up developing all these other accounts and harassing her and stuff like that. Yeah. And just like trolling her, like that happens sometimes where like people, like usually men, will just troll you across all these accounts. And then one day she got a phone call, and then it was like, because she was working at the time, she works from home, and because she had a phone call, she was in work mode, so she just answered it even though it was withheld number. And then this woman starts speaking to woman B, saying like, oh, I know where you live, you're in this house and all this other stuff. Yeah. And she's like, I can see your car in the driveway, this is what your garden looks like.
But why? Like, what inspires you to be that creepy, hateful? Like, if you don't like it, just block that person. Don't engage with content you don't like, and don't hate watch shit and then take it upon yourself to go stalk somebody.
The craziest bit, though, she says, oh, we found out we quite liked each other as people and now we're friends. No, don't be friends with that person.
No. Has she never watched Single White Female?
Exactly.
Bridget Fonda thought they were friends too.
Yeah.
No, not.
Exactly. It's dodgy as fuck. I would not be friends with someone like that. That is terrifying.
Think of that story when people are like, oh, like, how did you two meet? And you're like, oh my God, she stalked me. And like, I mean, she had, like rope and shit in the back of her car and some tape. I think she was going to murder me, but.
But now we're friends.
Yeah, we both had the same live, love, laugh, welcome that. And we bonded over it. And now here we are.
And then I just thought that there's something wrong there. Like, for example, like some of the guys that I had to care for when I was working with the offenders, and even though I got on well with some of them, I'm not going to be their friend because I know that they're offenders. They do weird, creepy shit. There's something not right with them.
You have to question, like, how did the conversation lead there? Like, how do you go from, I've tracked you down across multiple accounts, I've stalked you, I know where you live, I'm watching your house, to discovering you have things in common. Like, I don't understand the leap, unless that was the fastest case of Stockholm Syndrome ever recorded. Like, I don't understand how we got there so fast.
She says they were on the phone for like an hour and a half. Like,
but how? I mean, I'm trying to replay that conversation. If someone's like, I can see your house, I can see your car, I'd be like, oh, okay. On my other work phone, I would be calling the police to be like, there's a fucking stalker outside my house. I wouldn't all of a sudden be like, so what'd you think of last night's Bachelor?
Yeah. It's bizarre. And the funny thing is that like the woman B who made the TikTok, like she doesn't really do anything offensive, like not offensive enough to make you be a TikTok stalker. Like she says things that like you could disagree with them, then you might find them offensive because you disagree with them. But she's not racist, misogynistic. She's none of the bad words. There's nothing.
So she doesn't have the type of content that would inspire a stalker.
Like she doesn't do like thirst traps or anything. She's not a cam girl or anything like that. She's like, she's a married woman with like 2 kids, I think, and she has endometriosis. That's basically her content.
Gozer decides to start chewing a bone on the
Good lad.
Fucking Gozer. I wonder if it's someone who like related to her content so well, and like maybe had this single white female, like I see myself in her, I want to be her, so thought if I troll, maybe I'll get myself seen, I'll get myself noticed, and that's how we can become friends. Like maybe that was the whole ploy, was to.
And it worked. I once got from a bloke I like his content, and then he basically commented once balanced, full stop, cheers.
Oh,
Yeah.
see, I still get a little starstruck when someone I like really like leaves a comment on one of my
yeah.
videos.
I had somebody follow me that like I have no idea. Like, there's just some people I'm like, why do you follow me? Like, your content is nothing like mine, and I just think like
I follow a lot of people whose content is nothing like mine just because they do something that I find entertaining or intriguing, or it's a nice refreshing break as you're scrolling through.
yeah.
Although I think a lot of people sort of follow me because of the kick-ass facts, and then when I make non-kick-ass facts videos, they're kind of like, whoa, no,
Yeah. What the hell is this?
Yeah, we don't care for your opinion on things.
Yeah, stop.
Tell me
stop
about
having
duck dicks again. Let's
yeah. Stop having opinions about stuff. You're
So I started listening to this audiobook called Been There, Done That, and it's about the history of sex and like how we've gotten to where we are, and it's pretty interesting. But within the first 30 seconds, the author was like, I can't stop thinking about duck penises. And I was like, you and me both, girlfriend. And I'm I'm in. So apparently with ducks, they do the penis is corkscrewed, and some of them are barbed. And then the female contraption is equally tricky. It's like it's a fun house of mirrors. Apparently, the more horrifying the penis is, the trickier the vagina gets.
Yeah.
But if the female duck, if the gander, is it the goose gander, whatever, the female gander, I think it's a gander, is into it, then they kind of fit together nicely. It's when she's not into it that it becomes a horror appendage. But then she also has like trap doors where she can like sideline the sperm and then spit it out so she doesn't have her abuser's baby.
Yeah,
it's terrifying. Some animals have evolved into terrifying ways.
There are some types of sperm where like they either kill off all the other sperm, like a sperm that comes after, or they block up the fallopian tubes and things.
I have heard that. And what is it? Is it opossums that do like they plug and plug it up?
I think so.
And so she gets into the book, she gets into like, once upon a time, they didn't really understand like people's sperm, men's sperm. So they thought that a woman had to have like, they thought the babies were actually made of sperm. So a woman had to have like a ton of different partners so that she would have enough sperm with which to make a baby. And then she would get pregnant when she had achieved enough sperm to make a baby. So they were just out hooking up all over the place, thinking that they were going to have this like baby with 100 different men's little genetic imprints.
Well, I guess it's good for genetic diversity. It's a good strategy.
Yeah, sure is.
In that sense. Yeah. They also used to think that in the sperm, like because they didn't obviously have good enough technology to look at enough detail, they used to think that in the head of the sperm would be like a little human folded up inside of it, ready to unfurl and grow into a human. Yeah. And then the name woman, do you know what? I have a theory, okay? This is my personal theory, and I haven't read up anywhere about it. But if we'd understood biology in the detail that we do now, women would be called men and men would be called women. That's my theory. Because woman is basically a whiff man. That's where the term wife comes from. And it's like a not man, basically. Because they think that women, like in the womb and stuff, you're a man, and then if you're a woman, you're not a full man. So like you're basically an incomplete man. Whereas actually biologically we all start off as women and then turn into men as certain genetics kick in. That's why we have
that's why men have nipples.
Yeah. And that's why like, testicles drop and rather than raise up and all that sort of thing. So if we'd understood that we were women first who became men rather than women are incomplete men, then men would be called women.
Yes, but a lot of people still believe that women were made out of Adam's rib. So that would probably be a tough sell.
Yeah.
So I watched this video of this woman who was explaining the fallacy of the globe, and like she had a globe and she was like showing all these things on it, and it kind of got me thinking about conspiracy theories, especially that one. One of the questions that I saw today was like, what conspiracy theory do you think may actually be true? But the flat earth one, I think, gets me because, and maybe I haven't delved deeply enough into it to understand what the end game is, like what conspiracy, who benefits from fooling all of us into thinking we have a round earth, right? Like, is a big globe trying to sell school supplies? Like, what's the benefit? And that's like the one conspiracy theory that I really can't think of who benefits from tricking all of us into thinking the earth is round instead of flat.
I think it's because where I think flat earthers come from is because you've got a bunch of people who have the curiosity of a scientist, but the lack of education and skills. I don't mean that derogatorily. I just mean that they haven't been given the education and the skills to pass out scientific information, conduct scientific studies, and to understand the world around them in a scientific way.
I don't disagree with you, but I think that's like one thing that you don't need to dig deeper into, right? Like if they had that scientific curiosity, there are other things that they could spend their time on. Why does the flat earth, why is that?
I think it's also coupled with a sense of suspicion towards big authorities, which is typically an American thing. Again, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It's because America was born out, its foundation is against tyranny and authority. So as a nation, they're more prone to thinking that way. Okay, if somebody big is telling me this, which is ironic considering Christianity, but if someone big is telling me this, then I need to question it. Yeah, exactly. And then because they don't have the understanding of how to, let me try and think how to word it.
They don't have critical researching skills or the depth to look at, like, seek out or understand, read peer-reviewed scientific studies. Yeah,
that's part of it. And also that they don't trust anybody that's not them. So they only trust stuff that they can do with their own hands. They're basically a Doubting Thomas. They're like, okay, you're telling me I could do this. So if I go out and do it myself, but then they can't do it. Like you saw with the documentary with when they were trying to figure out the horizon.
Yeah,
and then as soon as
it's round.
Yeah, and they're like, oh, well, we did something wrong. And that's because they don't understand the scientific process, because the scientific process isn't about proving that what you think is right. It's about, am I right or not? You're asking a question. Am I right about this? Rather than I need to show I'm right about this, which is what they're doing.
And they're seeking a confirmation bias.
Yeah, exactly. And then as soon as they find what they're looking for, then they'll ignore everything else. And it doesn't matter about the quality of the information they've gathered. They're just happy to accept it, even if all of the other information there is cast iron and it's obvious to the rest of us. They just can't accept it because it's so fun. Because by the time they get that deep into the flat earth conspiracy, like to get there, you have to be balls deep into it. Like before that, before that, like you're just some Joe Schmo. Like you don't know anything about it.
It's just the tip at that point, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then you're just kind of finding out about it. Like, oh, this is intriguing. And you just have a natural suspicion and a curiosity and all that other stuff. And you get pulled into it. But because they're filling you with all of their lies and bullshit, by the time you're into it. And it becomes very hard to dig yourself out, like any cult.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of people also no one wants to admit that they were wrong or that they've invested all their time into something that turns out to be wrong, because then they feel like an idiot. It's like, I saw this conversation thread, I think it was on Twitter, where someone had said something blatantly false. Somebody went in to correct her, and then the original poster had commented like, don't ever correct me on my own page. And it wasn't like they didn't care that people thought that people knew they were wrong. They just didn't want people to see them being corrected because that was embarrassing. There's too much ego. We need to just let our egos aside.
Yeah.
But yeah, that new guy, the new UK guy who tried to say the patriarchy didn't exist because of the dictionary definition of it. And all his comments are like, dictionary versus colloquial terminology and how we use it. My guy.
I haven't seen who that guy is.
He's the one that I was talking about when I said that he thought that his account got banned because of female privilege. and he's kind of like, the shitty thing is, he's like Tate in that there's nuggets of good things that he says, but it gets so washed out by all the shit. right? Like he's also an advocate for men's mental health and like victims of male of domestic violence, male victims of domestic violence and sexual violence, and like he's got really good things to say about that. But nobody ever gets to that because all they hear is him say shit like, "How often does a nice guy need to be rejected before he stops being a nice
that
guy?"
bloke.
That's the guy.
Yeah.
So like he just his message just gets so lost in all the other vitriol that he puts out there.
Well, but it's because though what that is, it's a bad person, a bad faith actor standing next to a good idea.
Yes.
People do this all the time. People like Tate, people like Nigel Farage, people like this new wanker, and that's what they do. Is like they either contaminate good ideas by their presence, or they make themselves look better and bask in the reflected glory of the idea.
I haven't figured out which one he's doing yet, but he's and it's interesting because he talked about female privilege. So I was asking like, what are examples of that? And one guy put in a comment saying that he was a victim of domestic violence and he couldn't find a shelter to go to because they were all women's shelters. And like that was his aha moment. And I was like, you know what, that's terrible that happened to you. But if females really were privileged, we wouldn't have that many domestic violence shelters. The fact that they exist proves that we don't have that privilege.
And the other thing is that what blokes like that need to understand as well is that men and women process physical violence very differently. And what he went through is no doubt horrific and disturbing.
Absolutely.
But it's not in the same way as if he did it to a woman. And the reason why there are female shelters is that A, it's so fucking prevalent that women need them. And B, like you could, if a woman was abusing me, I could overpower her. Like, I don't have to allow her to abuse me. I'm not victim blaming by saying that, but it changes your psyche. It changes the way you process the abuse.
Like for a lot of female victims of domestic violence, it's not just physical violence. There's a lot of emotional and mental and other shit that goes along with it that makes them like, I see it all the time. I just saw a woman on Reddit who had said like, oh, my husband just made my nose bleed. He came home from a work trip. She tried to like help him with his bags. And then the language she uses, she's like, I did it quietly because I didn't want to be a bother. And then he like backhanded me and made my nose bleed. And it's like, all the comments are like, honey, he didn't make your nose bleed. He abused you. He slapped you. And the language you're using with, I didn't want to be a bother. I was doing it quietly. Like this may have been the first time he hit you, but there's been some abusive behaviors going on there for years to get you to that point.
Well, this is one of the reasons that like, that I will say that abuse against women is more visible. It's because men tend to physically act on their world. And it's usually the other way around for women abusing men. They usually do it to us psychologically, financially, and all that stuff. And then they tend not to be viewed as crimes or as serious crimes as the male physical abuse. So there is a bit of disparity there. But, and then that's why people like Lionel Richie or whatever, that like they've probably, part of what's going on is that they found a weakness in the guy's psyche that they're playing on in order to get him to allow them to abuse them. And that's part of what that problem is. But it still doesn't mean that women have female privilege, though. Exactly. Just because some men have been abused psychologically and physically by their partners, it doesn't mean that women have privilege because of that. It just means that the abuse towards women is more visceral and immediate, kind of like in your face.
And immediately dangerous, right? The majority of women are killed by people that they know and then their domestic partners.
Yeah. And then going back to that woman with the nosebleed thing. Yeah, and like so she's using minimizing language to try and distance herself from the situation. She's trying to downplay the role of her partner while trying to upplay her own responsibility in that. So there's a disparity for her there in her psychology. But then also like, I mean, this is the first time that she's talking about it. Doesn't mean it is the first time that he's hit her. Yeah. But it's like, it might be the first time that she's realized that he's hit her or damaged her in some way. Because sometimes this thing about abuse is you don't know you're being abused. Like anybody that's been abused will tell you that, like, I didn't realize until later that I was abused. So it sounds like certainly like sounds quite meek, if that makes sense. And that like, like he has created a victim there in some way. But it always comes down to the same thing, is that men process it differently. Men and women abuse in different ways, and men recover better from physical abuse and harm.
And also there's, I mean, there is that stigma that goes along with it, right? And it has nothing to do with female privilege. It really has to do, again, with like men being the ones who don't allow men to be vulnerable in those ways, right?
Yeah.
It's, and the way that men process it, it's like with, there was someone I watched a video, she was talking about how like men aren't taught, little boys aren't taught how to be men, they're taught how not to be women, right? It's like, don't cry because girls cry, you can't like that because that's a girly thing. So it's not, here's how you can be a better man. It's like, here's how you don't be a woman. Like, you don't like pink, you don't play with dolls, you don't cry, you don't do those girly things because they're girly things. And it's kind of generations of you got to be strong and stoic, and you can't be vulnerable and let people see you in tears.
I had a guy at work once, this was a few years back, and he had 2 dogs, and I was just talking to somebody about my cats, and then one day he just went like, having cats though is not very manly, is it? It's not like having like a couple of big dogs. And I was like, so? I was like, I literally don't care. He's my fucking boss as well.
What a dumb thing to say. Like, it's like guys who don't eat, like someone I saw doesn't eat croissants because croissants are gay. Like, how fragile are you that you can't enjoy a delicious pastry because of what somebody else might think, and they won't. Like, until that moment, I have never seen that take on croissants.
Oh, and I thought of another reason why women aren't privileged, because they have homes for battered women and men don't. It's because that men, they came from an era where men were the only ones that were allowed to work, and a woman, if she had to leave home, she literally had nothing, like literally nothing.
No money, bank account in her own name.
No bank account, no money, no resources. So she had to rely on charity and goodwill in order to escape a marriage. It used to be a very, very bad, very difficult thing to do.
And maybe not even the support of her family.
Yeah, is that like, I could go out and sleep under a fucking tree and I'm probably going to be okay. That like, I can find somewhere quiet to sleep and no one's going to fuck with me. But then, and I've grown up in some really rough areas, and I'm saying that, and I've been fucked with walking home from school and shit, so I know what it's like. But when I turned into a man and I grew up, all of that shit stopped happening because I carried myself differently. But I know that as a woman, I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't have the same level of safety, you know?
And it's like, they often tell women, it's women get a lot of conflicting messages too, because they're also, women are told, if you're out and you're walking, right, you got to walk with big dick energy, because no one's going to want to, like, a man's not going to be in, he's not going to want to attack a woman who is displaying that confidence, makes eye contact. They'll go after that meeker target. But then, so we hear that, and then other messages are like, no, you don't want to walk with that level of confidence, because there's going to be that attacker who wants to take a bitch down and like show her that she shouldn't. So we never know, like, how am I supposed to make eye contact or not eye contact? It's like a rabid dog, right? You want to look, but if you look too long, it goes from the point of like of just eye contact to a challenge. So it's a very different experience.
One of the things that I find frustrating is just how close-minded people are, and that they take things at face value and then they don't think before they speak, and then TikTok happens, right? And all the drama. And like, it just frustrates me, like, because, I mean, for example, there's people that watch our podcast when we talk about Andrew Tate, and they're all like, oh, beta male. They're just trying to insult me just because I'm just fucking defending women's rights not to be fucked with. And then they make lots of judgments about you. And it's like, if you knew anything that I've been through in my life, I don't think you'd be thinking beta male. Like, you don't know anything about me. So
exactly. And it's like, I see a lot of men making comments like when women speak out and they're like, this is why we need Tate. And it's like, do you, like, if you think you're such the alpha male that you present yourself to be, why do you have to hide under Andrew Tate's skirt? Exactly. Like, right?
Yeah.
Use your own voice. If you think you have, like, if you want to get that message out there, use your own voice. You don't need somebody else to speak on your behalf. Yeah,
exactly. And it's just like, and then they don't realize that they're just playing to his marketing campaign. That's all they're doing.
Absolutely. It's ridiculous. He's just using you. He doesn't give a shit about you or your life.
Yeah, it's just some bullshit marketing scam. That's all he's doing.
But then it's men, like the same type of men who call you the beta male. They're the same ones who, if they're losing an argument with a woman, or a woman says something they don't want to hear, instead of like the ad hominem attacks, instead of attacking what they're saying, it's
Yeah.
immediately like, oh,
Your
you're
makeup.
that bitch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why are you wearing so much makeup? You need to put on makeup. You need to take off that makeup. What are you hiding behind that makeup? Like, it's always the attacks on appearance. And at one point, and like I know that there are a lot of women that would impact, but what I'm noticing the trend is that the type of woman who goes out onto social media to make their platforms about those types of men, they don't give a shit if what you're gonna call them. Like it's these like, it feels very playground. I'm rubber and you're glue. Like they give zero fucks about your opinion about their hair, makeup, eyebrows, clothing, body.
Yeah.
So you're not doing anything. And then the hypocrisy of it, like there was one guy who was talking about Drew, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, Afalu, so her videos are very reactionary. All of her videos are kind of stitches about men and then talking shit about men who then talk shit about women. So if these misogynistic men didn't exist, her account wouldn't exist. But so a lot of men go after her and attack her because she is body shaming men, but they start it with, look at this fat bitch body shaming men.
Yeah.
Like you're kind of you're losing the point there.
They're actually found, there's a study done recently, apparently. I haven't looked into it, so I don't know how good the actual study is. But they claim to have found that 50% of misogynistic comments on TikTok are from women.
I have no doubt of that. Like it's crazy how many women have taken the red pill.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense as well because 50% of the population are women. So
yeah, there's a lot of women who, I don't know if it's internalized misogyny. I don't know if it's just the way that they were brought up and they were raised to be the good housewife and on what it is. But there's a lot of women who, given the choice of like sitting around the house all day eating bonbons, would I want that life? Sure, why not? Would I take it? Probably not. Because having my husband drop me off at work when my car was in the shop feels icky.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. You just feel like infantilized. And I'm just thinking, this is what women felt like for hundreds of years.
This really interesting video where there's a lot of people who talk about going back to like the 1950s. And it's like, but the 1950s, the women didn't want to be the way they were in the 1950s. That was a marketing campaign because women had gone to work because men were at war. When they liked having the freedom, they liked contributing, they liked getting paid. And then when men got back, they forced them back into the homes. And in order to sell women on that, they're like, look how happy June Cleaver is.
Yeah.
Pretty dresses and nice hair. Stay in the house.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't fucking work that time. It worked after World War One. They managed to subjugate the women again and send them back home. But that was a different time. And after World War Two, didn't fucking work. And I think that, like, going to your TikTok question the other day, I think a lot of it is that there are legitimate concerns among men about some of the stuff that's going on. And like in general in our culture and society. And I also think that even though they're not talking to each other, women are feeling the same way. Maybe about some different issues, but
even with the issues that men are facing, like I agree with you, there's no doubt that men are facing those issues. I think there's a lack of empathy from women because women have experienced a lot of these same things for a lot longer, and no one empathized with us except for other women. And now that men for a very short amount of time are experiencing those things and they're like, what the fuck? Women are kind of like, yeah,
it is fucking shit, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Like, how do you like it?
Yeah.
And men don't like it, which is the problem, but I don't think a lot of them realize that what they're going through, women have gone through for a very long time, or people of color have gone through for a very long time. So we've run out of, like, our empathy well has runneth dry because it's when I was doing research for that empathy video, one of the studies, and I didn't have time to put it into the video, was that they tested two groups of people, or the same group of people. I think there was like a 20 or 30 year span between them, to talk about their levels of empathy and how if empathy increased or decreased as they got older. And one of the things that they found was not only that age adult empathy, but also your own experiences did. That if you had a hard time with jobs and the cost of living is so high and the housing is not affordable and you're burnt out from your job, like you lose your ability to empathize with others because your own you're blinded by your own shit and everything that's going on in your own life. It's harder to like, oh, I'm going to feel sorry for you. I'm too busy feeling sorry for myself. Like I can't.
Well, I think another thing that will work on that as well is that because by that point you've seen shit, you know what difficulties there are in the world. And I think your own experiences will skew what you think is bad and what you think is traumatic. And then so that's why you run out of the empathy, I think, is because, look, I've seen how bad shit is. You're complaining about this. This is fucking nothing, which is valid in a lot of circumstances. But
absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that like adults forget about being a kid, right? When my niece was like 15, 16 and going through her first big heartbreak, a lot of adults in her life were like, suck it up, it's going to get worse. But that's the worst it's been for her.
Yeah, exactly.
She hasn't experienced anything worse than that. So when that's the worst thing, you can't say like what you're feeling right now, this world-ending, soul-crushing pain, it's this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like people forget what it's like to be young or to experience something for the very first time, because then you just take it for granted.
And then like in your niece's case, like the thing that she should have from her parents and from her close friends and stuff is teaching her and guiding her how to cope with a loss.
Yes, that's the one thing that's definitely lacking in general is coping skills. A friend of ours is a 911 operator. And so I asked him, like, what kind of training do you get, or what kind of mental health support do you get? Because these are just civilians who aren't trained to deal with a 6-year-old calling and saying, daddy's hurting mommy, right? So how do you what training do you get so that you can leave that at work and not take it home with you? And he was like, we don't. You don't. They get nothing, which is why half of them become alcoholics and abusive and whatever.
But that's the same thing with mental health. Like, working in mental health, you don't get any extra training like that on how to cope. What the NHS actually gives you, when I was there on the leadership scheme, was they were pushing resilience on you. So resilience is a word that was like, is very important in human psychology, and resilience is something we all need to have and develop. But the fucking government and the NHS weaponized it so that how to become more resilient and get your staff more resilient so that we can basically grind the shit out of you and get you to work too many hours and make a system that's fucked. And like just basically extract as much resources as we can. Completely weaponized it. But
that's awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when you go to job interviews and they ask you questions about like dealing with, how do you deal with stress? How do you perform under pressure?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of job is this, right?
Yeah. Like that, to me, that's a huge red flag, because it's like, okay, so you're asking me, how do I cope with the worst of the worst?
Yeah.
My question is
this a work environment? Like, is this going to be a work environment where everything is an emergency? And I worked in an environment like that where I would be made to feel as though I wasn't working hard enough if I wasn't responding to emails at 10 o'clock at night.
Oh, I hate that.
And I work in training. There's never been a training emergency. No. And one of them, like there was one night I was out with my friends. We were out for like our monthly dinner or whatever, and my work phone just would not stop. It was constant. And then finally I was like, I gotta just go tell whoever this is to fuck right off. And then I ended up sitting in my car in the parking lot for 3 hours on a conference call that essentially ended with, oh, okay, GVizzle, we'll send you everything in the morning and you work on it then.
Oh, fuck that. I think as well, like, I think there's something that we need to normalize in society is being able to say, no, this isn't for me, and just walking off and making that okay. Because I've done that twice in my life. I walked out of a job interview and I walked out of a work meeting. And the job interview was because I had no rapport with the people that were interviewing me. There's 3 of them. They were just dry. They weren't responding. They had no humor, so they weren't responding to any laughter or engagement from me. So like, it's quite normal in my job interviews that we'll all be laughing and having a good time by the end. And most of the time I don't get the job, but we have a good time doing it. I didn't get anything back from it. It was like talking to 3 fucking statues. We got halfway through and I said, look, this isn't going very well. I think I'm going to leave. And they were like, no, let's just finish. And I went, no, I'm done. Bye. And I walked off. And they were just
not everyone has that luxury though. That's the problem. Like, and I think that's one thing that a lot of people wait until they really hate their jobs to start looking for a new job. And then they're desperate and they'll take anything. So I've been guilty of it too. And when I've looked for work, when I'm not hating my job, like the job I have now, I looked for this job because I didn't like the commute that I had on my other job.
Mm.
And they had taken away my work from home. So I was working from home. The company changed. They took away my work from home, and I was like, no, I'm out. So I started looking for another job. But because I didn't hate where I was pickier, and I turned down offers whereas, and I love the job that I have now. Whereas when I've hated my job, I will ignore all the red flags because I figure like I won't hate it as much as I hate where I'm going. But not everyone has that ability or luxury of being able to say this isn't for me.
Well, maybe, but I'm talking in more general terms though. Like I know that a lot of people could be more hard up and then or not get as many job interviews. Like, and then so I will admit that like some of my experiences there are probably a bit skewed because I mean I needed the job at the time, but I also don't want to be miserable. And like I had like the give in the system at the time where I could turn that down. Also, I didn't think I was going to get the job because like there was no rapport or anything.
So I actually went for a job interview where the person did that on purpose. There was 2 people in the interview. One of them was like engaging and same, like we built rapport. The other person in the interview completely stone-faced the entire time. And so after I got the job, I asked her about it, and she said, "Oh, I did that to see how people respond with the lack of input." And like she thought she was doing a thing, right? Because she was wanting to see, are you still making eye contact with me if you're not getting any response from me? It's like, you know what? That's pretty shitty because these people are already here. They're nervous. They're meeting new people. They're trying to impress you. They're trying like as much as it's a two-sided interview, because I always consider I'm interviewing you as much as you're interviewing me. Yeah. People get nervous in that situation, and to purposefully make it worse to see how they respond, you're not going to get that true person. You're just getting a power trip out of it more than anything else.
Yeah. And the other thing is that like the interview that I walked out of is that like why I think it's important that we need to normalize this is because I'd fucking gone across the country. I caught the train up the day before, stayed in a bed and breakfast overnight, and then walked about 40 minutes to the interview venue the next morning. And I'd take my suitcase with me and I'd go back home the next day, right after the interview. So, you know, like there was a lot of time and effort, and I had to do prep work for the interview as well. So I had to read articles, prepare things and stuff. Like, so a lot of effort goes into it. So it takes a lot to say, nah, you're fucking bunch of jokers.
And I think, sorry, go ahead.
And I just think that like if people were more prepared to tell people to jog on, then we might get a better time in interviews. And I think companies might put a bit more effort into A, paying people more, B, actually being present in the damn interview at the time. One time, okay, I was the last interview in the day. The 2 blokes were obviously quite tired. And then one of them was a bit shitty during the interview. And I said to him, like, you know, what's up? And he was like, oh, it's just the end of the day. We've done interviews all day. And I was like, well, isn't that our job? That's what we're supposed to do. Didn't get the job, obviously, but I knew I wasn't going to get it by that point. And I just said, like, yeah, no, but I'm here. I was like, I've traveled down from fucking Newcastle today to be here to speak to you. I was supposed to be in work. And then now you're acting like this. I was like, that's just no respect.
And I think that's the thing that employers have always historically, you know, that for every one job you have, you get 100 applicants. So I don't think there's that, like you said, I don't think there's that respect for the person who's coming in. Like so I went, a friend of mine referred me for a job, and she very specifically told the person she was referring me to, saying, if working from home is not an option, don't waste your time, don't waste her time. And he was like, nope, that's fine. Totally down with working from home. So over the course of 3 days, I had 6 hours of interviews. So that means I had to take half days off of work. So it's a day and a half of vacation time for me. I had to travel to, 45 minutes from home, pay $20 a day in parking. And then constantly I was talking about the working from home, like every time it came up, because each day was 2 hours of interviews. So the first time I interviewed, I had 4 30-minute interviews. The second time was 2 one-hour interviews. Then I had to do this like test because they wanted to assess my training development. So there's like, here's a PowerPoint, you need to fix this. How would you train this? So I had to like develop training in an hour and a half, and then sit for half an hour and walk through. And the entire time, like they were talking like I had the job. And then I was told, no, we love you, but we know you want to work from home and we just can't offer that.
What?
And I was like, you owe me a day and a half of vacation. You owe me $60 in parking. You owe me I have blister pads because I wore fucking heels for this interview.
Yeah.
Like they knew,
Mm.
and they just didn't give a shit.
Fucking
And I don't
cunts.
know if they thought that I would fall so in love with the job that I would
Yeah.
forget about working from home. But and then it happened. There were 2 other times where I applied for like major retailer head offices.
Mm.
I don't pad my interview, my resume. My
Yeah,
experience
same.
is what my experience is.
So
So both times, once, one of the companies, it was 2 interviews
Mm.
over the course of like a week. The other one had 3 interviews. And then at the end of it, they were like, "You don't have any retail experience." I'm like, "Yeah, I knew that going in. You knew that
Yeah.
going in. Why did you call me in? If it's that important, why
Yeah.
was I even here to begin with?"
Yeah. So I keep missing out on jobs because I don't have a PhD. And then even though I aced the interview, I have all the practical experience. I did top-notch interview, got full marks. The other candidate had a PhD, so they win. I'm like,
You know what? When Target came to Canada, they would not hire anyone for any position that didn't have a university degree.
what?
Yeah. So that's maybe why they're not in Canada.
Jesus, man, that's so stupid. Talk about getting overqualified. And you want, like, the other thing is you want people with common sense and that can actually, like, work day to day and actually conduct themselves, and that's more important.
Yeah, because I mean, knowledge will only get you
Yeah.
so far. Experience goes a lot further than knowledge.
Because I could tell the amount of time I spent sitting in a room reading books, right, about other people's experiences. It's like I was talking to that guy, used to be in the army. He's got TikTok accounts called Rich, and he's really cool. But like he joined the army, and then after the army, he became a drug dealer, and then got sent down for it. Spent a few years in prison, and now he's come out. He's published a book, and he's turned his whole life around. Really interesting bloke. But we were talking about how, like, because I think somebody asked him about how, what's more important working with the prison population and stuff. Is it education or practical experience? Like he doesn't have any educational experience and stuff. So what can he actually give? And then I was just saying on that you kind of need both, but the practical experience is way more important because you can teach anybody to, like, if they have the life experience, you can give them all the education that they need. But like, if you've got the education and no experience, you can't do anything with that.
And I think that's the thing about jobs, is that they forget that there's the components of being successful in a job is like it's knowledge and skill. Knowledge you can learn, skill in a lot of cases is inherent. Like in the examples of retail, I had the skill of being able to develop training. The knowledge of retail, that's business knowledge. And that's something that anyone has to learn in any position they go to, because you don't walk into a new company knowing everything about that company. You've got to figure that shit out. But if you have a balance of like, I know the basics of the fundamentals, I have the knowledge of it, that experience is going to be what takes you, because that's how you develop those skills and enhance them.
That's one of the things I find that I struggle with the most in interviews, is getting that across to them, that like, because sometimes I feel like my resume speaks for itself, but it clearly fucking doesn't. And if I've like worked in like mental health, I've worked on bladders, and I've worked in zoology and chimpanzees and things, surely that can tell you that I'm adaptable. Just put me in any area. I don't care what the fuck it is. I just love doing research. So get me researching anything. I don't mind. And like trying to get that across to them, it's like, I just like research. Just give me the job. There's an ancient quote. Nobody knows who says it, I don't think. But you can tell way more about somebody in an hour of play than you can in a year of work. And I think that's the approach interviews should take. Is that if you're just chill, just chatting, hanging out with somebody, you will learn way more about them. Like seeing how they play, how they create, and all that stuff. You will find out what sort of a person they are.
That makes sense. I like that.
The weirdest experience I ever had about getting a job, this was back in the day, I was like 18, maybe. And I got a job at Job Centre Plus. So if you're unemployed here, you go to Job Centre Plus, and that's how you can get your unemployment benefit if you're looking for a job. And then you can also look for jobs. So it was for a job where you're putting the vacancies on the system. So we had the interview, and I just quit McDonald's. And they were asking me, "Oh, why did you quit McDonald's?" And I just said, "Oh, well, it's just because they did this when they're running the store. There were problems with training, and it was this, and this, blah, blah, blah." So just being autistic, very bluntly explaining what I thought the problem was. And then they said, okay, well, we'll let you know in a few days. So I was like, okay, bye. Went out the building, walked along. I was just walking along the main street, got a phone call basically 5 minutes later. Now we're going to go a different direction. Thanks anyway. It's a very low level job, right? And I was like, okay, don't worry about it. Thanks anyway, bye. So it was the woman that called me. And then the bloke called me a couple of hours later to offer me the job. And then, yeah. And I was like, what? He was like, yeah, we changed our minds. Do you want the job? And I was like, okay. Nope. No, I took it because it was like twice as much as I'd been paid at McDonald's. So,
oh, shit.
Yeah. McDonald's was on £3.14 an hour. So that's nothing. That's like $4 or something.
That was my first job ever. I made $4.10 an hour.
Yeah, times have changed. But then the woman that rejected me was our trainer for the week's training at the start of the job. So on the first day we did the thing. At the end of the day, I just bluntly asked her, and I was like, so why didn't I get the job in the first place? She was like, oh, do you want an honest answer? And I was like, yeah, why not? I'm autistic. People don't play games in my head, right?
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. So she was like, oh, I just thought you were a bit cocky and I didn't like it. I was like, oh. And she was like, I was like, why? She said, oh, because you were criticizing management and stuff. And I was like, okay. In the UK, you have this mandatory school until the July after your 16th birthday. And that's when you complete your GCSEs and then you can go to college, right? I misunderstood that. And then because my 16th birthday is quite early on in the school year, I won't say obviously what date it is, but it's quite early on in the school year. So, and I hated school. So when after my 16th birthday, I went, right, I quit. And I just left school and got a job. And not knowing it was illegal, I actually got a job at a department store in the city centre, which I don't want to name who they are. I got a temporary Christmas job for like stacking shelves and things and moving inventory. I never got to attend it because I found out I had to go back to school. But I was off school for so long that on my report card, I mean, I missed quite a lot of school anyway at that point in my life. But out of 6 weeks in the half term, I missed 4 weeks.
Wow.
I just didn't go to school for 4 weeks. and then my mum's boyfriend was like, hey, I looked up that law and you got to go back to school.
What an interesting law. So I think in Canada, and I could be wrong, I'll have to double check it, but I think in Canada, after your 16th birthday, I think you can technically quit school if you wanted to quit school, which for some would be around the 10th grade. But like, I don't think I think legally you have to go until you're 16, but you can quit at any time before.
Oh, I think it's to kind of protect kids here because of like, so that their parents can't push them out and go to work. Because of the whole industrial revolution and kids working in the factories and stuff.
My parents have a 4th grade education, but my mom, she's like Good Will Hunting. If she had been born in a different time or even just a different place, like she could have just done amazing things. She just never had the opportunity.
I feel like that about my own mom. Like even with all of her psychiatric problems, I feel like she would have been a fucking good racing driver. She was a very good driver, and I'll tell you why first, but in a minute. But she didn't get to go to well, she knew she was never going to go to university because her family was quite poor. But the eldest brother of the 4 of them got to go to university. So the rest of them weren't allowed to go. And then so my mum thought, oh, there's no point in following education, so kind of just dropped out of everything. But
too bad.
Where I realised that she'd be a very good racing driver is because she could be a bit psychopathic, and by that I mean that she could be very emotionless and very guided just by, like, you could see her calculating, and then she will act in an emotional way, but she's calculated that sort of
Interesting.
thing. Yeah. So I thought, like, so that level of logic is quite good. She's not a very clever person though, but you don't really need that if you're cunning, kind of thing. But the other thing is she got in an argument with her boyfriend one day. This was the solicitor guy, and where were we? It was like he was at the sailing club, and so she had an argument with him on the phone, and she had to go out and get him. So she took me in the car, drove the sailing club, angry all the way. We got there, and then they were standing in the car park yelling at each other. And then he gets in his car, and as he's reversing out, he clips the car next to him, knocks the bumper off, and just drives off. He's a solicitor. He's just fucking driven off.
Shady.
It's probably one of his mate's cars. But anyway, my mum chased him, right? And she's practically driving bumper to bumper behind him. And they're like going like 70 miles an hour down country roads. And then they went down a dirt track and there's all this dirt. You couldn't even see his car anymore because of all of the dirt. And she's just completely going by feel, just following him through this dirt road. Yeah. And then at one point they go, they're like, they come up to this garage and he kind of like, he's got a bit of a lead on her. So he just kind of like does a U-turn in the road. And my mum's like going after him. Yeah. But I think that's one of the things in my own life, like where I see people like my mum and your mum and that have had missed opportunities because of other people in their lives. Like that's one of the reasons why it kind of keeps me going, kind of thing. Sounds a bit stupid to say it, but because I've been so limited because of my disability, that like and just the amount of frustration involved, I just think the only way I can just keep myself going is just to focus on that side of it. They're like, well, what can I do? You know, what can I push myself towards and actually try and achieve?
I think that's the best way of looking at it, because if you just focus on what you can't do, then you miss out, right? It's a very narrow focus.
Well, the thing is, NHS England were pretty good about it. When that was the last time I was actually employed in a company with a desk and all that. Now I do freelancing at home and shit, and I work with universities remotely, marking work and stuff. But yeah, so that was the last brick and mortar job I guess I had, and they were really good. They tried really hard to keep me in the job. But the problem was I was on the management scheme, and they're one of the major universities who I don't mind mentioning is UCL. They said that I had to appear in the classroom like for 80% of the lectures, otherwise I can't attend. And I said, yeah, but this is a disability that's been made more acute because of all the traveling. And now I find that I can't do it. And they're like, well, you can't study here. I was just, they just didn't give a shit. Because I financially wasn't in a place to fight it in court or anything. I just had to leave it.
But aren't they legally obligated to do accommodations for you?
You would have thought so. And I think they are. But because of it takes time and money to go through court, which I didn't have. Or the wherewithal. I mean, I was in agony. I was on lots of drugs. So
yeah, you're not really thinking about it at that point.
Yeah. Which they take advantage on, you know?
Visually, since we don't have any visual fade to black, we'll just have to like drown out the sound.
Or maybe
like a fade out on a bad song.
Or a wah, wah, wah.
Sad trombone.